The difference between having a great quarter, making your number, or reporting a bad quarter often comes down to the effectiveness of your sales team's discovery calls and demos. But how do you make sure your reps are doing the right things on their calls in order to finish the quarter strong? Well, introducing Gong.io, the #1 conversation intelligence platform for B2B sales teams. Gong helps you ensure your reps are doing deep discovery calls and crisp sales demos by recording, transcribing, and analyzing their calls. And Gong allows you to understand how well your playbook is being followed and analyze how well it's working so you can constantly move the needle on your win rates. Now, if you request a demo of Gong as a result of hearing this message, you'll get a free ebook copy of my award-winning book, 0 Time Selling, 10 Essential Steps to Accelerate Every Company's Sales. So go to gong.io/accelerate to request your no-obligation demo and get your copy of my award-winning book, 0 Time Selling. Again, that's gong.io/accelerate, gong.io/accelerate. So go there now and come back and enjoy today's episode. It's time to accelerate. Hey friends, this is Andy. Welcome to episode 515 of Accelerate, where, as you know, I hold in-depth conversations with today's leading experts in sales, marketing, and leadership virtually every day of the week. Now, if you'd like to see the show notes for this episode, go to andypaul.com/515. That's today's episode number 515. What you'll find is a detailed timestamp breakdown of this and all conversations on Accelerate. So if you heard something during the show and you weren't quite sure where it was in the conversation, you can go to andypaul.com/515, scan the show notes, and pick up the bit of information that you missed. Now, joining me on the show today is Paul Teshima, co-founder and CEO of Nudge.ai. Now, according to their website, Nudge uses artificial intelligence to find insights on your accounts so you can grow stronger relationships with your buyers. Now, as regular listeners to the show know, I'm really fascinated by the role that AI is beginning to play in sales and the role that AI is going to play in sales, both in the near term and the long term. So I'm looking forward to talking with Paul and getting his perspective on that, as well as dive into how Nudge is using AI to move the needle on sales productivity today. Paul Teshima, welcome to Accelerate.
Thank you for having me, Andy. I'm excited to be here.
Hey, my pleasure. So first question for you, one I sort of ask all my guests is, what do you think is the biggest single challenge that sales reps are facing?
I think the biggest challenge that they're facing is that buyers know way more information than they ever know before. And so a rep cannot add value just by holding information about their product or service. They've got to find other ways to add value to the customer, which takes a lot of work.
It does. Yeah, I mean, I remember hearkening back to the days, pre-internet when I first started selling, is that, the prospect could basically only buy about as fast as I was willing to sell to them.
Absolutely.
Yeah, those days, thankfully, are long gone, because, the customers certainly want to make decisions faster than that these days. So tell us a little bit about Nudge. I mean, and sort of do that as a preface, because we're going to talk about artificial intelligence and AI and sales today, but a good way to start is just tell people a little bit about what Nudge does.
Yeah, Nudge is an AI platform that focuses on understanding the insights around relationships and how those relationships can help you either get into an account, help move account along, or influence an account as part of your buying process.
All right, I want to jump into that a little bit later about how it specifically does that, because I want to start more with just talking about artificial intelligence, AI, because it's a term that strikes fear into the heart of many people in sales. They think, oh my gosh, I'm going to be replaced by, a bot or something of that nature. So when you use AI and you talk about your own platform, but maybe even more broadly, what does that mean to you?
Well, I think there's sort of two trains that are running right now on this idea of AI and sales. I think the first, which is one that I think most people think AI is a bot or some sort of human interaction interface that interacts with potential buyers. And I think that has become the more prevalent version of it out there. And I'm not saying there isn't potential value in that down the road, but it certainly is really hard.
When you say human interaction interface, meaning
it could be an actual voice, or it could be text that interacts with people and talks to them as if they're a person, but really it's a machine.
Okay.
Doing it. And the reason why that is become prevalent is because people think about AI as a talking human being machine. And there's definitely value in the research and effort going into thinking about that. But one of the big challenges is that today, if you were to ask a machine, if you were to tell a machine two sentences, and let me say these out here. The first, the trophy didn't fit in the suitcase because it was too small, and the second sentence, the trophy didn't fit in the suitcase because it was too large. You as a person quickly understand that in one case you're talking about the suitcase being too small, in the second case you're talking about the trophy being too large. But a machine actually has no way to understand that. And so that's just a very simple example of how complex human communication really is.
Sure.
Never mind in a selling environment.
Well, never mind, and body language, facial expressions, all these things that play into it as well.
Absolutely. So that is one sort of train of thought around AI. I think the second, which certainly we are going down and others are as well, is that AI can be used to tackle problems that a human does today that they have to do. They are repetitive. They take some thought, but they are typically more behind the scenes. And so whether it is analyzing call scripts to figure out, what a rep is doing during a call, whether it is in the case of Nudge, doing lots of research on a company or a person so that you're better prepared for every interaction. So this kind of more grunt work AI, I think there's a lot of promise because as you know, sales reps spend way too much time doing that type of work and not enough time actually engaging in the selling and relationship building that actually is their key skill.
So in the second iteration of, or definition, let's say, of AI that you talked about is, I don't know, I was reading a blog post on your website actually about 4 ways sales leaders can use AI. And some of the examples cited seemed more like they were just sort of analytics, right? I mean, taking data sets that sort of existed and data or statistics could be derived otherwise. And it seems sort of, I don't know, to me, a little bit AI light to some degree. I mean, so we have this big trend with big data coming into sales, obviously, is there's a distinction, though, between just the analytics and AI.
Absolutely. I think that especially if you look at stuff that is more around reporting more, it's always going to start at the base level of just doing first level analytics. Where the AI comes into is where you apply machine learning to have a continuous improvement process around it. So by interacting with a tool, let's look at it as something as simple as I want to understand engagement across, how my reps are driving engagement pre-pipeline into the accounts that they're supposedly going after. First level maybe just analytics. Here's a report of every person and their engagement profile across different sets, say call it 100 named accounts. But if you go to the second iteration where now machine learning is taking into account the outcomes of those deals, like how many went into pipe, how many closed, and you can now iterate back and say, based on these profiles, these reps need to do more. These reps are actually good. You get into that continuous learning environment, which really AI can drive.
Okay. Well, I'm still trying to, and I don't want to spend too much time on this, to sort of discern. Even the example you gave to me seemed more like analytics, right? I mean, the stats change based on experience. People always, I guess, tend to think of AI as sort of having that component about not just analyzing, but also telling you what to do.
Yeah, I mean, I think, and maybe I didn't go deep enough on that example, but I think that AI. So let me give you an example of how we use AI, and we can walk through that.
Sure, that'd be great.
So today, sales professionals who have target account lists, they know that it's a much more an effectiveness versus efficiency game, right? They got to be quality focused on their engagement with those accounts because they're named and they need to get them, and it takes time, and there are multiple buyers. So maybe they sign up for Google Alerts today. Well, if you sign up for Google Alerts for Cisco, you're going to get 100 alerts every day on wherever Cisco is mentioned. Okay, AI can actually read all of those things about Google and do something called topic modeling, which is an assumptive process which says, based on clusters of words and some understanding of language, out of the 100 articles in Cisco, these 10 are really mainly about Cisco. They're not Cisco just being mentioned in the news. And out of those 10 about Cisco, these 2 actually are about a signal that could be related to a buying initiative that's internal to Cisco. Maybe one is a new growth announcement. One is a major change in how they're thinking about product lines. And so at AI, it's not as simple as just reading any article and saying, hey, of course, it's going to explicitly say that. They have to do this thing called topic modeling, which is a little more fuzzy in terms of how it interprets the words and language within an given article. And that's an example where as you get feedback from how users interact with that piece of content and whether it's successful in generating an actual engagement with an outreach, the system can get smarter about building that topic model again and again to be better and better at understanding those buying events.
Well, does it then overlay the topic model over your contacts and your accounts so that you create more context for them?
Well, that's the next phase where you can say, okay, if I know the universe of companies, the universe of people and relationships, and the universe of content, and you are actively engaged with Cisco based on these types of things, what is the next account that could be similar in proximity to both the relationships that you care about, as well as the things that are going on in the world from a content perspective? That would mean it would be the next best account to go for. And that's kind of would be the evolution of how AI can be used in a simple, specific example, and then rolled out to be more repetitive and advanced.
Got it. Well, let's talk about in the context of relationships, because this is really a critical part in sales, obviously. And it's one of the parts that you see to some degree almost being, sacrificed, if you will, with a lot of the development, the sales stack, and so on, so much automation going into it. Sort of back to your point about effectiveness and efficiency, is it seems like the actual relationship with the buyer becomes less important or to some people becomes less important if I have all this data supporting me. And interested in your take on that.
I kind of think it becomes more important because as a salesperson, so if you actually free up some of this research time and you get more effective because you're being told about a series of things that are happening that make these 5 companies the right ones to go for today, you can spend more time on the relationship building and building a competitive advantage as our salesperson because you're getting more time to spend on building the relationship. And as you know, people buy from people that they trust and like, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I actually see it as a swing slightly the other way. I mean, there is a whole movement on sales automation that is creating, a lot of obviously outbound volume focused on efficiency. But I see good use of AI as swinging the pendulum the other way and saying, as a salesperson, you can actually spend time more on doing what you love and what's important, which is building that trusted relationship. Because AI is doing the grunt work you need to get to the playing field to build that relationship. And so I think that that's where the focus is going to be. And I think you can continue to see more successful salespeople having more time to sell because of AI.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, certainly, and one of the things that you read a lot about AI is that, and we talked about this sort of earlier, you mentioned it sort of, listening to calls and modeling certain behavior types. And is one of the promises you oftentimes hear is people saying, well, look, this is a technology that's finally going to be able to quantify what makes A players and make it easier for the B and C players to model those types of behaviors. I mean, do you see that being the case? I mean, I have some opinions about that, which we can get into as we talk, but I see that cited more frequently as one of the real, hey, this is where AI is really going to help.
I think the more the role is process oriented. So if you think of like an SDR, right, where they're more fenced in terms of the things that they can and cannot do, especially ones that only generate meetings and not necessarily qualify, leads. I see AI certainly helping B players become more A players. I see AI getting deeper into closer to the customer in terms of how far it goes down that path of actually engaging, because the fence posts are more defined, and so therefore there are rules that can be put in that the AI can follow and how it helps. I think as you go into inside sales, and especially field sales, it is going to get down to so if the rep has time, if they're trained well, if they have skills, if there's a continuous coaching model on top of it. I don't think without that is AI going to get you all the way from turning B players to A players. I just think the machines aren't smart enough to do that part.
Yeah, well, I think that also it sort of overlooks the fact that if you look at A players, part of what makes them top performers is something that's really unquantifiable in many cases. Right? It is that personal interaction. It is what happens at that moment when they're talking to the buyer that even if you can capture the words, you can't necessarily capture the nuance and the connection.
Absolutely. And as you know, every salesperson has a different style, which allows them to be authentic in their style in different ways. And some techniques work for some salespeople because of the way they are and the way they interact, and some don't. And so I think that, again, assuming that a machine could understand that context of interaction at this point in time is a challenge. But freeing up salespeople to get more training, more engagements, more time to do that is certainly something it can do.
Yeah, I mean, you raise an interesting topic, and is that it seems that one of the goals, and I've certainly, this has been a goal for a long time. Maybe it's used channels, extensive use of channels to sell. Is they've always tried to say, well, what can we do to have that buyer experience be the same, from transaction to transaction to transaction, or from rep to rep to rep, or dealer to dealer to dealer, and so on. And it seems like a lot of the effort being put into, and again, I think AI to some degree, and other parts of sales automation, is to try to make reps be more conforming, not less. Right? I mean, one of my concerns, as I see too often, is that we're sort of squelching the individuality of people that, if they're given a little more freedom, could actually mature, perhaps develop their own authentic style, and actually make that migration from, let's say, a B to an A player. But as it is, it's really hard because they're being told you have to do this, 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 and this, be just like this person, and they're not that person.
Yeah, it is interesting. So there's a couple of, and maybe this is just in B2B tech where this wave is happening, but as deal sizes get on average smaller, right? Because competition is picking up and everyone's entering, every market has 500 players.
And you're all doing subscription sales and so on. Yeah, right.
That's right. The transaction size is smaller, so there's less on relationship. You end up falling more on process to drive value and make sure that you're actually closing business. I do think, though, that for every one of those startups that need to grow up and get into that next level of scale, as we're seeing it in some of the larger startups, they have to get back to the fundamentals of, well, how do you get a buyer to commit $500,000 in revenue in bookings? It has to be a very fluid and value-driven and customized process for that buyer, right? You can't just put an SDR with a 12-step automated campaign and outcomes of $60,000, $70,000 deal. And so I think that we are seeing that move down at the lower end of the market. But as we see that next wave of startups who do get through and start to scale to 20, 30, 40, 50, 100 million in revenue, they're going to have to get back to those sales fundamentals that allows them to really engage at the mid-market enterprise and get those larger deals and larger value points with a buyer.
Well, I agree 100%. And so it's sort of interesting. Are you seeing a change in, especially, let's say, in the tech B2B world, where companies are sort of, it always used to be the model was, hey, let's start with the small enterprises, the small mid-sized businesses, we'll scale up to enterprise. But it sounds like now we're seeing more companies, I certainly see this, that are saying, well, maybe we'll start with the enterprise.
I think we are seeing, so one thing about SaaS that's allowed you to do is you could go global much faster than ever before. My previous startup, Eloqua, we were probably at the 51st company that we signed. It was a global deal, and we never would have seen that in licensed software because it was very challenging to do that and scale.
Right.
So I think you are seeing that. I think that what's also happened is, and to be fair, I think there is a second and third generation of entrepreneur out there who've done the small grow to large and realize how challenging that is, and is getting more capital and tackling a bigger problem that they can take directly to the enterprise. And enterprises today are more apt to try new things as they are being forced to innovate and be competitive. So I think you're seeing two or three things happening at once that's allowing startups to go after the enterprise out of the gate earlier.
Yeah, one is right. Large enterprises don't view the startups as risky as they might have 15, 20 years ago. I think that trend certainly in this century has been one that's been amplified and magnified as time's gone by. Absolutely.
And another interesting trend I think that's happening in this is that, and I've noticed is, so as you get these startups going into enterprise quicker, where they rely much more on a relationship and value-driven sales process, you also at the same time have these, what I'd call tenure, 8 to 10 year inside salespeople who are graduating to the field. It's almost like a cohort who've been around long and only grown up with sort of a digital interaction paradigm. And so it'll be interesting to see how they impact a field sales culture and organization where you haven't had that sort of grown up through inside sales version of a field salesperson before.
Mm-hmm. Well, what do you think is going to happen?
Well, I think you're going to see, to be fair, I think you're going to see a little bit of a competitive advantage. I think that buyers today want to interact digitally. They want to interact socially. They still want to have an authentic relationship. So that part has to be there. But you have an advantage coming into that role knowing both worlds to some extent. And I think that's going to be an advantage to those inside sales reps who are graduating to the field organization.
That's interesting. I mean, because certainly field reps and the ones I'm familiar with and the companies I've seen do this, I mean, they're using social. I mean, they're connecting as digitally as the inside reps perhaps, but with the exception is that they're going to see the customer face to face more frequently.
They are, but I wonder, like, so you say that. I don't know if it's as broad, certainly not across multiple sectors as like I've seen. Like I don't see field reps across the board all adopting social, all adopting digital interactions primarily to start. I do see the ability for an inside rep to move to a field organization and have really good face-to-face interaction skills. I do see that happening, and I do see that because they have the digital piece ahead of time, they can operate at a much higher pace and to be fair, matching what the buyer is expecting on the front end at a much better level than potentially some of the other field reps I've seen who are struggling sometimes with the pace the buyer expects information flow.
Yeah, to be honest, I haven't seen that, right? Because one thing that's changed in field sales is the frequency with which people see in most fields, in most industries, they actually see their customers, right? They could be in the field, but yeah, they're spending most of their time on the phone, with in their office. They're going to go spend the money to go see the customer when it's something really important.
That's a very good point. I mean, and there's no question that there are field organizations that are transforming and going through that digital transformation or have gone through that digital transformation. I mean, absolutely.
Yeah, I might just see somebody if they're sort of at relative early stages of their career, whether in the field or they're an SDR. SDR may have more repetitions, perhaps. But if they're a young field salesperson, they've got a territory, whether it's named account or just a geographic territory. They've got to develop prospects, right? Are they going to be sending out as many emails, make as many calls as inside rep? Yeah, probably not. But I mean, it's a matter of degree, I think, at that point.
No, it's a very good point.
Because, I mean, I got to take my own experience. And when I started in sales, I was making 30, 40, 50 cold calls a day, in person. I wasn't making, 50 phone calls every day and 50 contacts. But, I'd say that there's a trade-off in that experience, right? So, anyway, interesting. So one of the questions then is, how do we take all this, these actionable insights that you talk about, this intelligence that we're developing, the data we're gathering, and how do we use it to actually elevate sales productivity?
Yeah, there's actually this is a really good question because I think, and this is maybe me having been at a company that got into scale previously and worked with a lot of salespeople, we are not naive to the fact that too much is sometimes not good. In other words, you don't need an SDR to read a 10K or an annual report to do an outbound outreach, right? And so there's a fine line between giving an insight that's valuable or helps differentiate versus actually is gone a little too over the top. And so, for example, we would train SDRs to not necessarily go deep on any insight and read the article and talk about it as part of their outreach, but maybe just mention one-liner, saw this, you were in the news, or saw that. So the best practices are actually being shaped on these insights by role, because sometimes you do want to go deep at the right stage, but sometimes it actually hurts you because now you profess to be some sort of expert around an area, or maybe you get it wrong, right?
Exactly.
And so I think, to your point, to be fair, you have to be smart about how you align the action based on role to these insights that are coming out of these new solutions.
Well, so part of what I was driving at that question, though, too, is one of the themes I keep sort of harping on in my show is okay, yeah, we've got all this great technology, these exciting developments in sales tech and in sales stack, but the reports that you read say, hey, we're not actually getting any better, right? As a profession, we don't have more people hitting quota. The close rates, according to Forrester, close rates on B2B deals, are stagnant. What are we missing? We've got all this huge opportunity to really transform what we're doing, and yet it's not clear that we're using it in a meaningful way that's having a lasting impact. So, I was just interested in your take on that.
Oh, yeah, this is a very interesting conversation, because I think that so in my mind, it's you're using all this stuff just to keep even ground, right? The number of buyers involved in a deal cycle have grown. The number of competitors and the pace that they reach out and interact with those buyers has grown. And so just to stay even ground, you have to be trying to adopt some of the best practices just to maintain your connection ratio, your conversion ratios, your close ratios. At least that's my view, is that unfortunately if you weren't doing the best practices, if you aren't trying to be innovative, you'll see you're losing ground and not gaining ground on quota attainment and conversion rates that are needed.
So what's the key then to actually boosting productivity in sales?
Well, it gets back to the point that I think I started out at the very, very beginning. So, and I'd love to hear your view on this, Andy, as well, is that, if you get back to this concept that salespeople, some of the best salespeople in the world, do an incredible job nurturing their network, right, over their career, not in a single job. Mm-hmm. Like they spend time, even if it's not going to provide quota relief this quarter, doing a couple things here and there to help stay in touch with the right people, help people out. And then when needed, those people that you've helped can help you back, whether it's in terms of access to an account or help in a deal or influence on a deal or reference. And I think that the thing that really moves the needle as a salesperson in the future is being better at managing and understanding that network and who's valuable and who you need to spend time with over your career. I think that is the key single biggest differentiator. And if you can use technology to help you do that, great. I think, and that's a great example why LinkedIn has taken off so much for many reasons, but because of that need to have some form of help in managing a growing number of weaker connections.
Interesting. And so in that environment, as you sort of described, so how much of that is based on virtually nurturing your network versus actually talking to people?
I think you can do a combination of both. I think that just like with any sales process, you do some virtual. I think you actually had a recent podcast by a guy named Michael Franklin who used the term nudges, which I thought was really interesting, because we often talk about the same concept. Right. That some nudges need to be much more in person or a phone call. Some of them can be much more subtle and implicit. It could be more social, as liking a tweet or just sending a nice note because you saw something about them. So I think that it's a combination of both more face-to-face, more sort of personally engaging ones to some lighter ones that happen. And so it's really just understanding that balance. I think that's important for every salesperson to do as they move along through the sales process or with a relationship that's outside of sales process.
Well, one of the things that comes from looking at what you guys are doing and the name of the company, Nudge, and we just talked about Nudge, is to me at least this concept of not velocity but momentum. We talk about velocity through our pipeline, but to me it's never, or I'll say rarely, sort of a straight line as you sort of assume with velocity, right? Is that it's with more peaks and valleys with aspects of momentum. And to me, sales is about how do you establish and maintain or restart momentum. And, I think this idea of a nudge really plays into that, right? Is because some are going to be more subtle, some are going to be more overt. And it's a combination of those that really get you from the start to the finish.
Absolutely. And making sure that through the low parts of momentum, which is the hardest to stay in touch, right? You do stay top of mind with those nudges because you want to be the first person, and whether momentum can be driven obviously by the rep can add to momentum, but certainly there's an internal business driver as well often that restarts momentum, right? And so being top of mind through the low periods so that when momentum picks up again, you are the first call, the first outreach back to take the reins and push it forward, I think is hugely important and hard to remember to do. And this is again where technology can help, whether it's AI or not AI, but certainly AI being smarter about it. Which prospects do you nudge today, not knowing where they're going to result in deals tomorrow? And so that's where, again, AI can help.
I agree. And I think it is one of the, poster child use cases of technology is this idea of momentum, being in touch, being front of mind with the customer. That if technology can help you do that, then to me, that's what sets people apart, right? I mean, if you're dealing with anything with any sort of complexity, maybe if it's purely transactional, momentum may not be quite as critical. But if you have any deal size, any complexity, if the duration of the sales cycle is beyond 90 days, you start getting into 6 months or so on. Yeah, momentum comes into it big time. And where most sellers fail is not staying in touch the right way during those sort of fallow periods. And those that can master that are the ones, in my experience, that always come out on top.
Yeah, it's the terrible just touching base email that you send because that's all you know to send.
Right.
Versus choosing the 5 where something happened and being slightly meaningful, like lightly meaningful in an outreach, whether it's their company just won an award, or they just had a great quarter, or they just launched a new product and it's doing well, or it's all those little things that make the difference in those nudges.
Absolutely. Well, good. Well, Paul, we could talk forever, but unfortunately we're at the end of the show. So thanks for joining me. Tell folks how they can find out more about Nudge and connect with you.
Absolutely. So you can find out more about Nudge at nudge.ai. That's nudge.ai. And we do have a freemium Chrome extension you can use that has no cost to play around and see what your network looks like. And you can find me on Twitter at Paul Teshima, at Paul Teshima. That's Teshima.
Excellent. Well, again, Paul, thanks very much. And friends, thank you for spending this time with me today. Make sure you come back again tomorrow. Another great episode of Accelerate for you. Until then, if you can, take a moment. If you haven't done so already, subscribe to this podcast. You can do that right on the app you're using to listen to it. Leave a review for Accelerate. We really want to hear what you have to say that we can do to help you. So thanks again for joining me. Until next time, this is Andy Paul. Good selling, everyone.